Good afternoon. A warm welcome to the latest BVCA webinar, and thank you for joining. I'm Leon de Bono, Assistant Director General of the BVCA. Now, much has been written and discussed about private equity and value creation in the past 10 years. But as we know, this is an unprecedented crisis requiring an unprecedented response. Businesses have been adapting in new ways, many adjusting their business models in a short space of time, even including the BVCA. Now, the purpose of this webinar is to capture some of the key changes and the lessons learned that we are seeing. We are delighted today to be supported by EXM to host this webinar, and I'm very pleased that we're going to be joined by an excellent panel. We have Manfredi Bargioni, Chief Operating Officer at EXM Insight, who will moderate the panel. Maria Carradice, who will be recognizable to many of you from a recent webinar we ran on ESG. Maria is Portfolio Director, Tax and Finance at Mayfair Capital. We have Warren G, Chief Portfolio Officer at Cairngorm Capital, and Simon Poole, Partner at Helios Investment Partners. Now, Manfredi, it would be great just to turn to you in the first instance. Perhaps you can just give us a little bit of background on EXM, as many people may not be as familiar with you as they'll be with the GPs on the panel. But also, I know that you've recently produced a white paper on this topic. It would be great to hear a little bit of background on that, and particularly the timing of it too.
Yes, of course. Thank you, Leon. When the crisis hit us in the UK and Europe, we, like everybody else, personally and as a business, we were impacted by this black swan crisis that nobody could have prepared properly for. Obviously, one of the things we wanted to investigate, we are a company that works with GPs, supporting them with a digital solution for value creation and strategy execution and control. So we are particularly interested to talk to our customers and to talk to other people in the industry to understand their point of view, not so much for the immediate crisis and the immediate response, which we are living through now, but more like the medium-term ideas about what's going to happen in the next 12, 24 months. Nobody has a crystal ball, but obviously there are ideas and hypotheses, and the results of these numerous interviews we have collected in a white paper talking about, again, how the PE GPs see the post-coronavirus crisis response, especially in terms of value creation. And obviously there are a lot of ideas or anecdotes and information in the white paper, but 4 themes that were recurring over and over again to all the people we talked to, and these 4 themes are essentially the basis for today's webinar that we're going to explore a little bit more in depth with the help of our expert panelists. These 4 themes are the strategic agility and the requirement for being very reactive and fast and creative in response to the crisis, the acceleration of digital transformation, trends that were already in place, but obviously we are seeing moving at light speed now. The impact on the crisis on ESG, on the ESG themes in general, and their importance. And last but not least, also the role that private equity can play, and value creation within private equity especially, can play to help the economy at large to bounce back, face the challenges and the opportunities that are going to present themselves in the next, again, medium-term future. So that's essentially, again, collected in our white paper, but so I encourage everybody to also to look at the white paper after the webinar, but it's very interesting that we are here today to discuss these themes more in depth. So without further ado, I would move maybe to introduce the first theme for our discussion, and this is the strategic agility. Over and over again in our discussion came this idea that we don't know what we don't know. It's impossible to plan for certain for what's going to happen 12 months from now. Everybody has ideas, but obviously the most important and the key success factor will be the ability to react quickly, to be creative, adaptable, both in terms of the portfolio companies, but also in terms of the role that GPs can play and the value creation teams in this sense, in collaboration with the companies. So I would pass the mic to Simon Poole to give us a little bit of insight about his experience on this subject.
Thank you, Manfredi. As you said, this is a health crisis, and I think when it started, the reaction of most private equity firms was quite similar. You go into crisis mode. Initially, you focus on the health risks to employees and customers and your business partners, and then secondly, you look at the cash flow and liquidity of your portfolio companies. But once you've gone past that initial step, then you need to start thinking about how is the world changing, and how can your portfolio companies do their best A to survive and B to thrive in this new world. And I really believe that this change that we're living through now is the biggest change that any of us have seen in our lives in terms of business and society. If you could take yourself back in time to the 1st of January and explain what was going to happen over the next 6 months, quite frankly, it would be unbelievable. The things which have happened since the 1st of January, and of course, with that rapid pace of change and also a lot of uncertainty going forwards. People don't know how long this is going to last. Are we going to find a vaccine? Are we going to have a second wave? There's still many uncertain things out there. You need to have portfolio companies who are agile. Now, agility isn't something that you can just suddenly turn on. A gymnast is agile, but a gymnast is agile because they've done years of training before they come to do their performance to become agile. You can't just suddenly become agile. And so the companies that I see performing best in these circumstances are companies where they have spent a period of time becoming agile and developing their skills to be agile. So I'll take an example of one of our portfolio companies. By the way, Helios Investment Partners is an African-focused private equity firm. So our portfolio companies are essentially in Africa. What I'm going to talk about is Crown Agents Bank, which is actually a UK bank, but most of its business is in Africa and the Caribbean. We acquired the bank 4 years ago, and at that time, it had previously been government-owned, and it was quite an old-fashioned kind of organization. There was lots of paper being moved around the office, and they were dealing with customers, making requests by email and so forth. There were very many manual processes. So over the last 4 years, we've used Lean Six Sigma to improve processes. We have digitized many of our processes so they have straight through processing, so that when in early March, they were told, right, you have to go from 100% in the office to 100% working from home, they were able to make that change, and in fact make the change very successfully. So they were agile, but they didn't just suddenly become agile. They were agile because of the various steps that they had been through prior to the crisis. So I think that's one of the key points is how prepared were you before the crisis for any kind of crisis which might occur. The other thing I would say about our portfolio companies is because they're operating in Africa, it's an environment where you do have a lot of sudden changes. So, for example, you have regulators who might suddenly change the rules. And so you have to have a certain amount of agility and adaptability built into your mindset. So I think that also helped our portfolio to adapt.
Maria, if you want to add something.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think I agree with everything that Simon has said there. And I think also agility, whether you are a business that has suddenly been thrown into chaos throughout this pandemic, or you're a business who has suddenly found that you have increased your order book significantly, you know, you still need, I think, to have an agile process to be able to cope with that. So at Mayfair Equity Partners, we invest in consumer and TMT businesses, and you know, certain of our businesses have done very, very well and are doing very, very well out of this. And having the ability to agilely move the business to be able to accept new orders and to take on new customers very, very quickly has also put them in good stead. And I think the other thing I would say about you know, the pandemic in general is that whilst it is a crisis, we have a chairman within one of our portfolio companies that is always saying to us, don't waste a good crisis, because out of that crisis will come opportunities. And whether that's opportunities to look at processes and look at the way you run your business and prepare going forward, I think you know, every single business now, whether you've been very adversely affected or very positively affected by this, should be looking at what changes they can make going forward to make them a lot more agile.
Yeah, I think I agree with that, Maria, and with what Simon said there. I think though for our portfolio, so Cairngorm Capital, we operate in the sort of lower mid-market, and a lot of our portfolio companies are perhaps quite traditional and have been doing things the same way for, you know, the last 20 or 30 years. So I think what we found was the fact that, you know, we'd been perhaps introducing ideas to them and making them really focus rather than just plan, then that really helped them when the crisis hit to be able to not so much change direction, but just prioritize in different ways. So we saw things like, you know, some of the digital stuff come right to the front. We saw, you know, people needing to work in a socially distanced way. A lot of other perhaps more established businesses that you heard about were scrambling around looking for laptops and finding out how they could get people, you know, connecting. Whereas a lot of our businesses, because we'd sort of been thinking about how to operate in different ways already, you know, we were able to react pretty quickly to that.
Well, that's interesting, because that also segues very well with the next theme that we're going to discuss, which is digital transformation. Obviously, you know, many trends of digital transformation have been happening for many years, from e-learning to e-communication. Obviously, e-commerce is the most famous one. But we've seen that the acceleration of that's taken place during the crisis. But again, also the overall opinion was that this was not something just that could be superficially addressed within the companies, but it's about going deeply inside the value chain, from the suppliers down to the end customer, and even the collaboration between WGPs and portfolio companies is moving towards a much more digitalized way of doing things. Leveraging technology that already existed, but that maybe was not fully taken advantage of, or there was a certain resistance or dragging feet maybe from some businesses to adopt it fully. Maybe a bit of skepticism, but if anything, the crisis has demonstrated that, you know, people can work from home, can telecommute, can be smart workers. So what do you think, Warren?
Yeah, I think we've seen a massive change in mindset in this space, haven't we? I think if you look back at digital transformation historically, I mean, it can mean a whole lot of things, but a lot of the literature says that 70% or even more of digital transformation programs fail. And I think although everybody talks about digital, perhaps they don't really understand it. And this crisis has really brought about not so much an understanding of what it is, but a real life example of what digital transformation can deliver. You know, there was always a belief that in some industries, customers would never go online to look at product or to interact, but you know, they've been forced to now. And you sort of look at and then sort of falling back to that previous point on strategic agility. No one's really sure exactly how the world's going to end up. So you have to be able to interact either with your colleagues or with your customers in a way that suits the here and now, because the world goes on and business goes on. So I think the way that I'm sort of thinking about digital transformation now is not so much as a massive big program, but as perhaps a series of smaller initiatives to go after. Starting with that ability to operate remotely or in a socially distanced way, and even things like passing paper now, that carries potential health risks. So finding a way that we can do that sort of stuff digitally, thinking about the proposition or the ways of working. How do our customers want to interact with us, and then how can we interact with each other, and how does communication in a lockdown situation work? All those sorts of things. And then I think it's only then really that you start thinking about the efficiencies that digital transformation give you. A lot of businesses are, I guess, facing quite dramatic reductions in their planned revenue streams. They've probably got cost bases that fitted their previous forecasts. So how do they run their business in a way that allows them to first of all survive and then thrive? And I think that piece of it has been the real unlock in our portfolio. It's just that people are starting to understand that what was seen as a nice to have is now an absolute essential, in order for businesses to survive through this revenue fall off. And then I think because you've got that real movement, Manfredi, you're starting to get into the whole realm of data and how can you use data not only to run your own business better, but to be a better partner, or to look at how your employees are interacting. I think one of the things that have, a big risk around the lockdown and the way that people are remote working is around people's mental health, and that whole feeling of being a bit isolated, even though you're communicating through a screen or or such like. So I think there's a whole big play to come and a big trend that will come around the use of data, and not necessarily in a big data way, just in looking at the insights that that data already in portfolio company can give you.
That's very interesting. And Simon, does this reflect your experience in Africa?
Yes. So I think what is interesting is when we talk about these themes of working from home, e-learning, e-health, e-commerce, they're the things that people most frequently cite when you say, what's going to change, what are the mega trends which are going to change the world after the crisis. And some of them, I think, could have a real positive impact in Africa. So there's many people in Africa who cannot afford healthcare, who cannot afford learning. And these new models are fundamentally more efficient. If we take e-learning, the idea of having a teacher standing in front of 30 students is almost kind of Victorian in nature. And it's a very expensive way to teach people. I think for younger children, you probably still need to have a real life teacher. But when we're talking about adult learning, and particularly postgraduate learning, I think there's a real opportunity there to become more efficient and to adopt this way of working. And I think most of these trends, they were things which existed before, but they've been accelerated by the crisis. So if we take working from home, in the UK, prior to the crisis, about 5% of the UK working population were working from home. 5 years earlier, it was 4%. So it had increased by 1% in 5 years. Now we suddenly have, 25, 30, 35% of people working from home. And when it's time to go back, not all of them are going to go back. Some of them are going to say, well, actually, no, I'm more efficient working from home. I think I'd rather stay here. And the other change in the UK is most of the people who were working from home before were of sort of a managerial, executive, professional class. It wasn't something which most employees were allowed to do because there was a lack of trust. Will that person really be working from home, or will they be shirking from home? And I think the crisis has demonstrated that people can work really well from home, and the level of productivity has even increased. So you know, the trust problem has been eliminated. And just coming back to Africa, so we have an investment in the largest private university in Morocco, and they had to very quickly go to 100% of lectures delivered online. And it's not quite the same as having a university which was conceived as an online university, but they're getting a lot of experience and practice, and they're gradually improving their own processes and systems. And ultimately, I think that will be a better business model in the future, having a kind of blended online education experience.
And Maria?
I mean, I would say in terms of digital transformation, I spend quite a big chunk of my working day working with our portfolio to do that in various guises, whether that's a full digital transformation or if it's more targeted. And I think I would say that the companies where they have embraced that, and we have got good digital technology in place, have been able to move much more quickly in terms of getting good quality managerial data out for management and the board to make quick decisions on things. And if you have a good digital system, a good digital platform, you can be uploading that. It's very dynamic. It could be every 15 minutes. And I think those businesses have been able to react very, very quickly, have been able to provide the banks with the information they need to have discussions with them regarding relaxing covenants, regarding getting access to bigger pots of cash, and I think that has made a huge difference. And whilst digital transformation is difficult and most people don't understand it, and quite often in the past the programs are set up to fail because they're managed and they're put together by people who don't actually understand what they're doing, I think there's much more people are much more aware that it is a good thing to have, and I'm being asked quite a lot now to have a look at a whole digital transformation program, looking at digitizing the entire ERP system in ways that enable people to get that really good quality commercial and financial data to be able to make the key decisions regarding suppliers, customers, and particularly around things like profitability. Is the business in the next 6 months going to be profitable when we come back? What is that going to look like, and how can we change the business such that it is a profitable concern going forward? It's also been very, very useful for scenario planning and for cash forecasting because of the same thing. And I think picking up on what Warren said regarding being able to work remotely, I think the other thing that it normally in the past has been an IT problem. So if you haven't got access to be able to work from home remotely, it's an IT problem. If there is a security breach, it's an IT problem. And I think having a lot of your workforce now working from home, it does make you think that actually this is a business problem. It's something that the entire business is responsible for. It's not your IT system, it's not your IT department. Everybody has a responsibility, and in order to work safely and securely at home, I think there needs to be a lot more focus in the next coming months and possibly years on the cybersecurity aspect of digitizing the businesses. But I think that's where we'll end up, because we need to get access to data quickly to make those agile decisions more effectively at boards.
Simon was there just talking about training courses and e-learning and the move from classroom courses to digital. At the BVCA, we run e-learning courses, but quite a number of classroom courses, and we've spent the last 2 to 3 months digitizing them, and actually found that the take-up has been very good and the transition has been quite easy. I think we face a bigger challenge with converting, for example, our events in terms of digital transformation, but what we are finding is that just we're having to do a lot of kind of cold, hard thinking, and actually we're coming through the end of that process now, and it's producing a lot of creative ideas and innovation too. So actually, having been through that process, we feel all the better for it, albeit we would not have wished in any way for those circumstances. But I'm curious with yourself, Manfredi, and the paper that you've run, and you've been asking a lot of GPs. Did anything else emerge when it came to strategic agility and digital transformation that we haven't just covered?
Yeah, well, a couple of things. In particular, the discussion reminded me a quote from actually the Simon provided us from the late Ayrton Senna about opportunities. And Ayrton Senna used to say that when the sun is shining, you cannot overtake 15 cars. When it rains, you do have the opportunity. So whatever is a challenge is also an opportunity for the industry. And this crisis offers obviously many challenges, obviously, it depends on the sectors, but it also does offer opportunities. I mean, I was reading this morning that KKR has just announced that they've acquired invested 1 billion to acquire a Dutch holiday park operator. Now, holiday parks is not typically something you would think to invest in this moment of crisis. But again, a lesson that we learned maybe from the 2009 crisis, they're obviously different in nature, but can maybe give us some insight, is that companies that kept doing smart investment and also GPs that have strong value creation teams, all the data points to the fact that then the years following the crisis, they were very successful. They reap the rewards of investing and keeping a smart approach to the crisis. And the other thing, obviously, the digital transformation is very close to our interest, being a digital company ourselves and providing obviously digital solution to the GP industry. Another thing that was interesting in one of the interviews with a fund that operates in Asia was they were observing that digital transformation is not only about the companies themselves only, but it's about the whole country infrastructure. And they were giving an example. For instance, this fund owns 2 restaurants chains, one in Korea, one in South Korea, and one in Australia. And so when the crisis hit South Korea, the restaurants already had a very developed app, very efficient takeaway and home delivery services, because in Korea is very popular and everybody is very technological. The infrastructure of the technology is very modern in Korea, especially in Seoul. So they almost transitioned seamlessly from, and the revenues were not hit really, because they almost compensated the restaurant with increased takeaway and delivery. While in Australia, where this infrastructure was not in place, where people were not so commonly used to do home delivery or using the app to order the food, the restaurant essentially shut down, and they had to restart from zero with a reinvention. And this goes back a little bit to what we were saying about agility, that Simon was saying, that you cannot build this thing in a day. I mean, either you built this experience and through the years, and then now you can leverage it, or you find yourself, scrambling. And obviously, yeah, you can always find solution and do something, but you find yourself in a disadvantage because you have not built this resilience, these digital capabilities and understanding, and through the years. As Warren was saying, some companies were ready, they were not digitally transformed, but they were ready to approach a transformation faster, while others scrambled. And that's obviously the difference between them who's been more successful in dealing with the immediate crisis and who's been a bit less successful. Then, so we can move to the next maybe subject now, and is about ESG. Obviously, we do not want to focus everything on ESG. You had already another webinar before, and obviously Maria is an expert on the subject, but we thought it interesting to ask the question, how is the crisis going to impact ESG? Is it going to almost be brushed under the carpet as something that are, not priority because of the crisis, or is something that's, on the other hand, we can become even more important and even more integrated in the way companies operate? So maybe Maria can give her opinion on this.
Yeah, sure. I think ESG is here to stay. And I think there's been plenty of evidence over the last few years suggesting that ESG companies with strong ESG credentials there's a correlation between that and sort of better returns. So I don't think it's going away. I think the thing that people struggle with ESG is the initial costs of getting things up and running, and that's always going to be there. But there's a lot of regulation coming, mostly from Europe at the moment, which again was the subject of a previous webinar. And I think, overall, what we will see coming out of this crisis is that those companies with strong ESG credentials have been more able to handle the crisis, and will hopefully emerge from the sort of crisis in a much more positive, in a much more sort of position of strength. So I think there are, if you look at the companies that have strong ESG credentials and have been looking at ESG programs, they tend to be more sustainable. They understand their supply chains in more depth, and therefore when suppliers have had difficulties in this period, they've been able to switch suppliers, they've been able to go elsewhere. They tend to have more rich conversations with their key customers as well, so again have been able to move more quickly in terms of that, and they've been able to have stronger conversations with banks and shareholders and people that have been able to shore up the liquidity position in the short term. I think the area where I think we are going to see a lot more engagement with companies from ESG is on the S side, so the social side, the treatment of employees. And you will have all read in the newspapers recently that there have been some very clumsy decisions made by some large companies regarding the treatment of their staff during this period, and I think all of those things lead to reputational damage. So it will be interesting to see when things come back to sort of whatever the new normal is going to be, how those companies are going to source good quality staff that are loyal and trustworthy and all those things. I think also mental health is going to be high up on the agenda, because we really don't know yet what this crisis has done for people in terms of their mental health, and the way that they're having to adapt very quickly. Their personal circumstances may all be very, very different and may be difficult, and so I think there's going to be quite a lot coming out of the sort of mental health issues. And also the diversity issue. So again, we've seen in recent weeks with the Black Lives Matter that diversity is coming further up the agenda. So I think, in the short term, the governance and the social aspects of ESG are going to be very, very high on people's agendas.
And is it the same experience you have, Warren?
Yeah, I think so, Manfredi. I thought right at the start, with all the chaos going on, that ESG would fall down people's agendas, but actually I think what we've seen in the crisis at a human level is a real kind of reconnection with people, and you hear lots of stories of kindness. The Thursday night clap for the NHS initiative really showed to me that people do really care about that sort of stuff, and it's not this cutthroat world that we all think we're living in, around making money and doing better than someone else. So I think it's going to become more important for all the reasons that Maria said. The getting decent employees, or good employees and loyal employees, but also on the customer side and on the supplier side as well. And I also think that as the government starts to put out all its sort of recovery initiatives, that they're already talking about linking some of these things to the sort of green ticket, and I suspect that they'll attach more and more of these things to the creation of an ESG framework within business.
And Simon, your experience in Africa?
Yeah, so Helios is not explicitly an impact fund, but because of the nature of what we do, bringing private investment into Africa, that in itself is very impactful, and so we've always focused very clearly on ESG. And to my mind, a company cannot manage ESG well unless it is a well-run company. And so it's quite normal that companies with a high ESG rating will also have high performance. if I give you an example of one of our portfolio companies, how kind of the two things are linked. In Africa, and I guess in the world generally, there are a lot of road traffic accidents. So that was the most common cause of accidents in one of our portfolio companies. And so they looked at various activities, training drivers, making sure that we have good quality vehicles and so forth to reduce the number of accidents. But the real the thing which made the biggest difference was looking again at how the company was organized, so that they had to visit sites less frequently, and therefore they significantly reduced the road mileage that they were driving, and that naturally reduced the number of accidents. So at the same time, you have a more efficient company and a safer company. And so I think that those things are linked. We've been involved in a number of businesses which are investing to improve the environment in Africa. So some of our portfolio companies have been involved in banking the unbanked, so it's investing behind that theme. As you may know, many people in Africa don't have access to bank accounts, and so mobile money enables them to do that. We've also invested in 2 solar power companies, so one which is bringing solar power to individuals and the other which is bringing solar power to businesses. And so I think we have a lot of experience of investing in this area, and I think, as I said, the crisis accelerates trends which existed before. There was already a trend towards greater ESG management before the crisis, and I think there will be more after the crisis.
That's very interesting. The last theme of the webinar is the PE role, especially in terms of value creation. I think the general consensus is that PE can be a strong driver to help the economy bounce back stronger and faster than would normally occur, because of the agility, because of the experience, because of the access to the cross-fertilization of ideas as well, and in particular the role of the value creation process sponsored and supported by the GP, and especially those GP that invest in value creation teams. We believe has been validated during the crisis, and will be even more more validated in the post-crisis. So maybe we start with Maria with this little round of final round.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think we are going to be seeing a lot more active partnership between GP value creation teams and the portfolio companies going forward, at least in the short term. And I think the way that we interact as a GP with our investment teams will change, in that we will be scrutinizing all aspects of the business models for potential businesses coming into the portfolio in a lot more depth, and that will that takes both the investment teams and portfolio teams will be doing stress testing on the robustness of those models, and I think looking for those opportunities, whether that's things such as SKU reductions, or looking at M&A opportunities, looking at actual business profitability and testing that. And I think the way that we are going to engage with due diligence providers is probably going to change as well, such that those things are given much more focus than they have previously. So we've spent quite a lot of time in the past looking at the historic aspects of the financial performance of a business, where I think there's little point doing that now, because the go forward position isn't going to be reflective in any way of the previous position. So I think there's going to be a lot more active partnerships internally within the GP, but also externally with the portfolio teams and the management teams of the portfolio companies. I think, as you've said, that it's been tested and we know it works now. And for those people that have portfolio management, portfolio value creation teams, they are probably busier now than they have ever been. and I know for certain that my teams are extremely busy at the moment, and we are seen to be a partner and a valuable piece of that jigsaw puzzle with the management teams that we are supporting. So that's where I see it going forward.
The same for you, Simon.
Yes, so we have always had an operating team at Helios, and I think the value of having an in-house operating team is being borne out in the crisis, because you can move very swiftly to implement changes with your portfolio companies. You don't have to go out and hire experts and do an RFP and so forth. So within Helios, we have an HR specialist on our team. We have a Lean Six Sigma black belt. We have a digitization specialist. So, we have various skill sets in-house who can work with portfolio companies. And the other thing we try to do is bring portfolio companies together. So none of our portfolio companies are unique in the challenges which they're facing in this crisis. And in fact, many of the challenges, they have their peculiarities within each portfolio company, but many of the challenges they're facing are the same. So by bringing them together, they can learn from each other and use their experience. So for example, all of our chief human resources officers in portfolio companies have an annual seminar, and now they have relationships with each other. They communicate on Yammer, and so they're learning from each other about how you're dealing with people working from home, how are you managing mental health issues, how are you planning the return to the office where offices are reopening in various countries. And I think it's being part of that community which is valuable for portfolio companies. We've all seen one of the good things about this crisis is how communities have started helping each other on a kind of day-to-day basis, wherever we live. And our portfolio companies are also a community, and they can also help each other and learn from each other. So I think private equity could be a real key player in the emergence from this crisis and in helping the new normal be a successful way of doing business in the future.
And Warren?
We've been fortunate, I guess, in that a big part of the Cairngorm Capital model is to be quite hands-on with our portfolio companies. So we, similar to you guys, Simon, we have a team of operating partners who are heavily involved in our portfolio. So I think that sort of close collaboration was already there. But what I think I guess speaking every day rather than maybe once a week or once every couple of weeks about specific strategic initiatives through the crisis has brought those teams a lot closer together. And you're right, that being able to share those ideas of the patterns that emerge and being able to put people from different portfolio companies together with similar issues has been hugely powerful. And I think as we do step through this recovery, there'll be even more of that, I hope, because none of these companies really compete with each other, and there's a lot to learn from just some of the real simple stuff that will lead to less wastage in the economy as a whole.
Yes, I think that this chimes very well with all the other feedback we received through, and it's contained in a white paper, the positive role that PE can have in supporting companies and sectors in coming out of the crisis, either stronger or at least as strong as possible. The importance of ESG as to support future valuation, not just as a token gesture, but really integral to the development and opportunities that the businesses have, and the role of value creation, which obviously this is what we do as well, obviously at EXM, supporting companies, the value creation of GPs in companies to our solution. So it's very important for us, but it makes perfect sense that you know, the confluence of the digital revolution, the importance of the collaboration aspects between GPs and investment, and even between the investment across the portfolio, as Simon was saying. You know, portfolios, companies have a lot of experiences and ideas, and at the moment you can cross-fertilize and share this information, and obviously this is a role that the value creation team in the GP can play perfectly. It adds value to the whole portfolio. So that's very interesting. So I thank you so much to the participants. It was, I think, very interesting, and also to the listener. Just to remind you that you can download our white paper and read the things we discussed today and some more information. You probably find it quite interesting. I had a lot of fun in doing the interviews because you know, it revealed a lot of ideas and a lot of thinking, and you know, some across the board, but some others specific to different sectors and various experiences. And if you want to contact us with questions and ideas, please do so. So again, thank you.
Thanks, Manfredi, and to Maria, Simon, and Warren too. The role of private equity and venture capital as we emerge from the crisis is certainly one that we'll be developing and talking more about in future webinars, and also as we build up to our own digitally transformed summit in October, which will be on the 7th to the 8th of October. Thank you again to you all. We'll be having our next webinar is coming on this Friday, which will be our usual policy update with a special focus on particular themes. But in the meantime, we're conscious that you're all busy people. Thanks again to EXM for their support of the webinar today. You stay safe, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.